as one can with the differences, and ensure that we remain as tightly connected as we possibly can. Just to say a couple of words about kind of the specifics in U.S.-Turkish relations that I saw. Whenever congressmen and others or senior people would come to Turkey, we have, there's a country team briefing that embassies have. I always like to start the conversation with members of Congress by going around the map. And I did that in part because in any CODEL, or congressional delegation as these are called, there were at least half of the members that had never been to Turkey before. Often they were coming from Iraq or Afghanistan, or going to Iraq or Afghanistan. That Turkey was a stop-off point to kind of catch up with the timeline and have conversation with a country that's important for those issues. But I wanted to go around the maps. And you can, there's no map here, but you all know Turkey. You can go around the map as well as I can. And my conclusion with them was, find me another American ally or friend anywhere in the world that borders on so many hot spots of such great priority in American foreign policy, and you won't find one. We need Turkey. We need to find ways to work effectively with it, whether it's on the Middle East, whether it's Middle East proper, or Levant, perhaps, or Iraq, or Iran, or the Caucasus, or Russia, Ukraine, the Black Sea, the Balkans, and of course Cyprus, the Aegean. Each and every one of these, I think, has been at different points over the last 10 or 15 years, very high on America's list of priorities. They are issues of great concern to Turkey for sort of obvious reasons. They're of great concern to the United States, and to the extent that we can find common cause, given that on all of the issues that arise around that area, we basically want the same things. Our goals and objectives are at least very similar, if not more or less identical. Find ways to work effectively and not let differences get in the way, not let aggravations about periodic differences, in which there always are, and sometimes they're important, sometimes less so, get in the way. And maintain the personal relationships that I think are very important for any bilateral relationship. And that, I think, is a way to bring it back to you. United States relations with any country are in part about the work that ambassadors do, secretaries of state do, presidents do. That's government-to-government stuff. And it's important never to lose sight of that, as I'm sure no one here does. But bilateral relations are also about people. It's about business. It's about ties among non-governmental organizations, and especially, I think, ties among academics. One of the most enjoyable things that I had the opportunity to get involved in as ambassador was to be the head of the Fulbright Commission in Turkey. Met each year the 60 or so 50, 60 Turks that were coming to the United States, and 25 or 30 or so Americans that came to Turkey. I was fond of telling both of those groups, you are ambassadors for your country, and maybe not quite the same way I was, but you are ambassadors for your country. The role, the contribution that you were making to understanding among average people, or more or less average people, about each other's countries, in a lot of ways make a lot more difference than what those of us in official life do, especially over the longer term. So thank you all for the work that you're engaged in. I know there are a number of interesting reports, topics to discuss here. I looked over the list, and I know you want to get on to that. But I'd be happy to respond to questions, respond to comments that people would like to make. Please.
Thank you.
Can we just get the mics? Hold on a second.
Well, I can project my voice quite seriously. Thank you for your carefully chosen words, Mr. Ambassador. I would like to ask just one question. You used the word activism for Turkey's recent foreign moves, and not policy. Are they playing catch-up? What was holding them back?
I'm not sure I'd want to use the word catch-up, and I'm not sure I would want to talk about things holding them back. I think and Turkey was always involved some and there are experts here who can probably speak to this better than I can, in the region around its periphery. And I think in particular Turkey's involvement in the new independent states of the former Soviet Union in the 1990s, sort of getting out there, playing a role, trying to help these new countries to establish institutions, stand on their feet, and so forth. But Turkey was not a particularly significant actor in the Middle East. It ended up, it clearly had a role with respect to Iraq, but the role was more that of logistics support and other backing for what other people were trying to do to deal with the problem of Saddam Hussein. Turkey clearly had a relationship with Iran that goes back centuries, of course, but a modern relationship that is built around economics and tourism, some of the necessities of Iran as a transit route to Central Asia. Turkey's role in the Caucasus is somewhat limited because of its estranged relationship with Armenia, or the lack of any relationship to speak of with Armenia. Turkey's historical relationship in the Cold War period with Russia, limited obviously because of what the Cold War meant and the position that put Turkey as a frontline state in, and we could continue to go around. What I see, as I try to suggest in my somewhat prepared remarks, is a Turkey that both at the government level and at the popular level wants to be and expects to be much more directly engaged in the issues around its periphery, that wants to play a role in resolving those issues, to have its voice heard, that wants to sort of overcome the past. One heard more about this a number of years ago, but there is an Ottoman past in the Arab world that is not always embraced with fond memories by Arabs. And then there's a heavy economic component to all of this. Turkish exports have tripled for a reason, and one of them is Europe, but another one is the very rapid and significant growth of Turkish exports, Turkish investments in the countries to its south and to its east. So to my mind, it's not something that was anything in particular that was holding it back. With the exception of the sort of Cold War and maybe the Cold War legacy, as it is an appreciation by Turkish authorities and the Turkish public that the country has interests around its region and it needs to be out there, to use the American expression, it needs to be at bat in kind of working on those issues and representing Turkish interests.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Ali Aslan, Zaman newspaper. Mr. Ambassador, what is your analysis of relations between the Obama administration and Erdogan, the government? And what are your suggestions to both governments to improve relations?
Did everybody get the question, more or less? I think that my comments will be somewhat superficial for reasons that are perhaps obvious. I think that the Obama administration came into office determined to work our friendships and our alliances more effectively than the Bush administration did, or the Bush administration was perceived to have done. And perceptions about the Bush administration are, frankly speaking, as a former senior official of the Bush administration, are a little bit different than the realities, especially when one talks about the second term. But anyway, the Obama people, I think, came in determined to try to change that reality, and especially to change the perception, to work with our friends and allies, and to nurture those relations as an end in themselves, and as a means to solve some of the problems that are important in the region, whether it's Iraq, Iran, the Middle East, or whatever. And I think that was, at the end of the day, the big motivation for the president to include Turkey on his first trip abroad after taking office in January. I think, so that's one point. Second, I think there's been the president personally is, and flowing from that, the president personally has invested a considerable amount of time, arguably somewhat more than President Bush in his second term, in cultivating a relationship with the Turkish Prime Minister, to some extent with President Gül, Secretary Clinton, likewise, a significant amount of time working to cultivate a personal relationship with Foreign Minister Davutoglu that was a little bit different on both accounts than what one would see, particularly at the end of the Bush administration, Secretary Rice, Foreign Minister Babacan, and the outgoing President Bush, whose priorities, I think, in the last year or so started to change a little bit. Third, I think there is, I'll be honest, I think there's been some disappointment in Washington that has not produced more than might have been hoped for, and the dissonance that developed between our two countries in May and June 2010 over Iran is an example of that, maybe the best example of it. And I think the fourth thing to say is that that dissonance over Iran and the dissonance related to the Mavi Marmara incident created a climate of opinion in Congress, especially in Congress, to some extent among Washington elites more broadly, that has narrowed the scope that the Obama administration has to work with Turkey in the way that they had originally envisaged, I think, when they took office. And so some of the work that's gone on over the last year between Turkish and American diplomats has been to kind of get that back in order, to deal with those dissonances a little bit more effectively, to get American and Turkish policy more clearly in sync where our interests overlap. And as I said earlier, they are at least similar, if not more or less identical, on most of the issues that matter to us. And so to show a little bit better partnership. To me, it was symptomatic that in the run-up to the meeting with Iran that the P5 plus Germany group had in Istanbul, Turkey and Turkish leaders were careful about their rhetoric on the Iran nuclear issue. Turkey was, it seemed to me at least, to be careful not, again, to get itself in the role of a mediator, but more in the role of a supporter of the P5 plus Germany effort to negotiate an acceptable solution to the Iran nuclear problem, and supportive of Iran as it tries to figure out a way, but not in a mediating role, not in the middle, which I think was part of the problem that erupted there. A lot of work that Washington has done over the last year to try to help to put together or facilitate a process that would put back together a reasonable relationship with Israel, a relationship that I think is fundamental to the role that Turkey would like to play in the Middle East, without which it isn't going to play such a fundamental role in the Middle East. And so I know Washington has invested a fair bit of effort there. My sort of overall perception is that things are a lot better than they were 9 or 10 months ago, and I think that's reflected in the close conversations that Secretary Gates has had, that Secretary Clinton has had, and that the President has had more recently with Turkish authorities, and in particular having to do with events in the Middle East, and developing a reasonably common approach to the problems in Libya with respect to Gaddafi.
If I could follow on a little bit from Ali's last question, but take it back to, or try to bring it back also to your comments on receiving the Fulbright scholars who were coming over to Turkey. One of the things in American foreign policy vis-a-vis Turkey is that we need to have a coterie of people who understand Turkey as state and defense and a number of other markets. At times, that bench was pretty thin. Do you see that changing, or do you see an understanding of the day-to-day concerns in Turkey, whether they be, as you pointed out, political or cultural or economic? Are we beginning to produce the young scholars who are Americans, who understand Turkey and understand in a greater depth and have an influence on the formulation of policy? Do you see that? Do you see a trend in that direction, or stasis, or whatever?
I'll give you three answers, Dave. I think, first, when it comes to Turkish scholars, others in the room are probably in a better position to answer that question than I am. I'd like to think so, but I don't know. Second, there clearly are there are a lot of different voices in Washington talking about Turkey in starkly different ways, but they're talking about it, and that, at the end of the day, I think that's probably a good thing. You don't agree with what this person says or that person says, that's